The bones were never supposed to surface, not in 1863, not now, but when a flood swept through Rutherford County in the spring of 1997, it peeled back the layers of manicured history like rotting wallpaper. What lay beneath the roots of an ancient oak near the ruins of Rosewood Manor weren't just bones. They were teeth, charred femurs, and a rusted brass tag stamped with a number, 46. No name, no record, just a number. The ground had finally given up its secret, one buried by power, protected by wealth, and erased by time. This wasn't a cemetery, it was a ledger of human currency. You're about to learn the real reason the Chamberlain family never collapsed after the Civil War, not because of cotton, not because of clever investments, but because they were willing to turn flesh into fortune, and no one, not a single soul, was going to stop them. This isn't just a story about a southern dynasty, it's about how power is passed through blood, often spilled, never spoken of. What you're about to hear will claw at your sense of truth. If you keep watching, you won't come out the same. You've been warned. Welcome to the foundation of American rot. Rosewood Manor was never just a house. It was a stage, an illusion of southern grace built to distract from the machinery beneath, a white-pillared deception built over cursed soil. While the North and South tore each other apart, Ezekiel Chamberlain stood untouched, and unchallenged, his empire blooming like a cancer during famine. Cotton poured from his fields while other plantations starved for labor, and yet no one asked where his workers came from. No one asked why they never left. They should have, because those who did disappeared. Their families silenced by convenient drownings, forged documents, and sealed military reports. You see, Ezekiel didn't just survive the war, he fed on it. Union contracts, Confederate bribe, Bess, and a labor force bound by lies and vanished beneath his watch. And while other men fought and bled, he grew rich behind French chandeliers and mahogany walls that muffled screams in the night. His ledger books told one story, the unmarked graves another, but the true record, the record that matters, was etched into the earth by quicklime and silence. If you believe history is written by the victors, you're only half right. The rest is buried. And the Chamberlain name, it's carved into the underside of American success like a secret brand. They called him a businessman, a gentleman, a pillar of Tennessee society. But Ezekiel Chamberlain was something older than titles, something colder. A man who learned early that power wasn't taken by force. It was harvested, quietly, from those too desperate to fight back. He didn't need chains. He offered contracts. He didn't beat men. He paid them, then made them vanish. The illusion was flawless. Workers signed on willingly. Freedmen, widows, Irish immigrants, all seduced by the promise of $2 a day and shelter from the storm of war. But what they were really signing was a death warrant, written in ink and enforced in blood. Their wages, held in trust. Their stays, mandatory. Their escape, impossible. And when the question started, where's Thomas, where's Eleanor, where's the Freeman family, the answers came fast, smooth and deadly, drunk, dismissed, stolen tools, drowned in the river, all of it signed, witnessed, and sealed. Ezekiel didn't just disappear people, he erased them. Even the sheriff found nothing to hold on to, no bodies, no traces, just perfect paperwork. And behind it all, Margaret, his steel-spined wife, who tracked flour and candles down to the ounce, but never once recorded a burial. Because in the Chamberlain household, death was just another form of bookkeeping. It was the smell that gave them away, not blood, not decay, something sharper, cleaner, like lye, vinegar, and steel. Sheriff Briggs first noticed it near the storage sheds behind Rosewood Manor, a chemical stench that didn't belong on a cotton plantation. It clung to the air like a warning. He had come asking about a man named Thomas Henley, a blacksmith turned laborer who hadn't been seen in weeks. Ezekiel greeted him with calm civility, ledger in hand, witnesses ready, story rehearsed. Thomas drank, stole tools, was dismissed, all signed and documented. But Briggs had known Henley, knew the man's vow of sobriety after his father drank himself to death, knew his calloused hands and quiet reliability. The documents were perfect, but something else wasn't. Briggs rode away with the official story in his pocket and dread in his chest. Then, 3 days later, Henley's sister Martha was found drowned. No injuries, no struggle, just gone. And the one photo she carried of her brother, gone too. The floodgates of questions began to crack, but every answer was swallowed by that same cold certainty. The Chamberlains were always prepared, always watching, and behind every smile was a mask crafted to withstand scrutiny, because when you own the narrative, no one looks deeper. But someone did look deeper. His name was Josiah Creek, the overseer, the enforcer, the man who'd cracked whips for Chamberlain men since 1834, a brute molded by the system, loyal to power, until something shifted. By 1863, Creek had seen everything a plantation could offer in cruelty, but what the Chamberlain sons were doing, it was different, it was colder, more clinical. He started noticing gaps, missing names, vanishing workers, cabins cleaned out overnight. The ledgers said there were 67 workers, Creek counted 39, and still the cotton yields grew. At first he dismissed it. War breeds confusion, but theirs. And came the nights, the lanterns. Daniel and Samuel slipping through the shadows at 3 a.m., followed by 2 pale, silent men with surgical bags, not farmers, not field hands, something darker. And always, always after their visits, another worker missing. No alarm, no explanation, just gone. Creek's loyalty fractured. The truth was festering, and it reeked of secrets soaked in chemicals and buried beneath polite smiles. This wasn't labor, it wasn't war profiteering, it was something ritualistic, something engineered, something ancient in its precision, yet modern in its concealment. He had spent his life enforcing order. Now he realized he had been protecting a machine designed not to build, but to consume. It happened on a moonless night in April. Josiah Creek followed them, Daniel, Samuel, and the 2 pale men, through the plantation's sleeping corridors and out toward the woods. They carried a canvas sack, heavy and wet, dragging low between them, the kind of sack that only moves like that when it's holding something once alive. Creek kept to the tree line, silent, breath shallow. They passed the family cemetery, but didn't stop. They kept walking, deeper. Behind the final oak, Creek saw it. A clearing, a shallow pit already dug, torchlight flickering against the edges. And then Ezekiel appeared, dressed in black. Calm, commanding. A bottle was produced, thick, clear, filled with liquid that stung the air from 20 feet away. Quicklime, a substance not meant to cleanse, but to erase. 73 souls to build an empire, Ezekiel whispered, pouring the chemical into the grave. Each one, a brick in our dynasty. Creek froze. He wasn't witnessing a burial. He was watching a ritual, a sacrifice disguised as strategy. The numbers in the ledgers, they weren't workforce tallies. They were counts, offerings. And with every body dissolved, the Chamberlain name rose higher. The Bubdo. Her fortune wasn't built on cotton, it was built on alchemy, the transformation of flesh into power. Creek didn't sleep for 3 nights. His mind replayed the scene again and again. Ezekiel's words, the sack, the hiss of quicklime searing through flesh. But it wasn't just the horror, it was the order, the efficiency. This wasn't madness, it was method. And the barn, God help him, the barn. Creek had followed them there after the burial, just a glance through a crack in the wall, but enough to see tables, chains, metal tools too clean for agriculture, jars, some filled with liquid, some filled with things, preserved, studied, labeled. Daniel's chemistry degree, Samuel's fascination with anatomy, it had all led here. to a private laboratory hidden beneath the veneer of southern gentility. Creek realized the cotton fields were a mask. The real enterprise wasn't harvesting crops, it was harvesting people. What for? Medical experimentation? Occult ritual? Government trade? Creek couldn't know, but he understood one thing. The Chamberlains were no longer planters. They were engineers of power, refining a system where bodies became capital. This was no longer about labor or greed. It was about transcendence through control. They weren't just feeding a dynasty, they were feeding something else. And if Creek spoke, he'd join the 73. The deeper you dig, the more the pattern reveals itself. Every missing worker had been chosen, not at random, not by need, but by attributes. Creek began rereading the ledgers by candlelight, tracing Daniel's meticulous notes. Height, weight, blood type, prior injuries, family history. These weren't pay records, they were case files, selections, like livestock at auction, but catalogued with a physician's precision. Blacksmiths, seamstresses, mechanics, people with unique skills, unique bodies. Creek even found notations beside some names. Strange symbols, not English, not Latin. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. These weren't laborers, they were ingredients, chosen for properties, purposes, worth, and every time someone started asking questions, like Martha Henley or the Freeman family, they vanished. One by one, the cotton empire grew while the community hollowed out. No funerals, no letters, just silence. But silence is a form of consent, isn't it? That's what the Chamberlains were counting on. That no one would risk their comfort to face the truth. That horror, when buried deep enough, starts to smell like normal life. If you're still watching, really watching, then this is your moment. Drop the phrase, "blood remembers blood," in the comments twice. It marks you. It separates those who know from those who choose not to. Blood remembers blood. But what if that memory isn't human? What if the Chamberlain legacy wasn't born in the cotton fields, but pulled from something older than the war, older than America, older than names? Ezekiel wasn't just a plantation baron, he was a student of forgotten texts. Hidden behind his mahogany study shelves were volumes with no publisher, no author, no recognizable alphabet. Creek saw them once during a storm, books that bled ink when touched by rain. One bore a symbol that matched the ones he found in the worker logs, a spiral pierced by a vertical blade. It wasn't until years later, long after the manor had rotted, that a local professor identified it as an emblem used by a pre-Columbian death cult in the Yucatan, a group that believed bloodlines could be purified, weaponized, through sacrifice and secrecy. Ezekiel didn't just invent the Chamberlain method, he inherited it. A lineage of hidden power passed down through select families, families who understood that empires aren't built on land or gold, but on obedience and ritual. This was never just southern corruption, it was ancient design, and Rosewood Manor wasn't a home, it was a temple. Amazing Bixby, ornament to what men become when they believe God is watching and approves. What disturbed Creek most wasn't the rituals, not the quicklime, not even the blood. It was the calm. The way Ezekiel would sip his brandy after a disappearance, the way Margaret would hum old hymns while balancing the household books, deducting room and board from wages that would never be paid. This wasn't madness. It was governance, a system, a code passed down in whispers, embedded in the architecture of the South. Because Rosewood wasn't the only manor with secrets, stories began to echo across the hills, plantations that thrived while others failed, families untouched by war, always smiling, always growing. The Chamberlains weren't outliers, they were the standard bearers, and in the shadows, other names whispered through coded correspondence: Blackthorn, Delacroix, Brimsley. Ezekiel received letters in sealed black wax, letters Creek once caught a glimpse of, signed not with names, but with those same inhuman symbols. The phrase repeated again and again: preserve the yield, cull the rest. This wasn't about survival, it was about purification, selection, control. And if Creek hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he'd have dismissed it as madness. But madness doesn't keep ledgers. Madness doesn't engineer chemical baths. Madness doesn't build dynasties that last centuries. It came to a breaking point when Creek discovered the map. Hidden beneath a false bottom in Daniel Chamberlain's desk drawer, an old surveyor's parchment, water-stained and brittle, marked with rows of numbers and tiny black X's. Not cotton fields, not property lines, graves. 73 black X's, clustered in unnatural symmetry across a quarter-acre just beyond the cemetery fence. Each one labeled with a symbol, some ancient, some scientific, some that made Creek's stomach turn. This wasn't haphazard disposal, it was geometry, ritual math, the kind you don't learn in school, but in hidden order. The map had a title etched into the corner in blood-brown ink. Red Foundation. Beneath it, in delicate cursive, all legacies require fuel. That's when Creek understood. This wasn't about removing threats, it was about building power. Each death wasn't just elimination, it was an offering, a conversion, a transaction paid in life for influence, protection, wealth. The Cotton Empire was just a storefront. Behind it, something far older was being fed. And Ezekiel. Ezekiel wasn't the architect. He was the custodian, the steward of a ritual that had no end, a ritual designed to be inherited, passed down like silver, like land, like blood. The Chamberlains didn't fear death. They understood it, as currency, as leverage, as architecture. But Creek began to fear everything. Every creak of the stairs, every missing candle, every new worker brought in with that same hopeful look in their eyes. He tried to speak once, quietly, to a reverend from Murfreesboro who'd come to bless the fields during a summer drought. The man listened, nodded, then returned the next morning with Ezekiel beside him, smiling like nothing had ever been said. Creek's warning had already been erased, just like the others. So Creek did the only thing he could. He began to record. Not in ink, not in letters, but in memory. Exact, perfect, word for word. Night after night, burial after burial. He memorized names, symbols, dates, coordinates. He became the ledger. And deep down, he knew. This wasn't just about exposing the Chamberlains. It was about understanding the blueprint. Because what they built, it worked. The wealth, the immunity, the respect. Every drop of blood tightened the grip of their control. And the question that began haunting him was no longer, how do I stop them? But what if they're right? What if this is how power is meant to be built, and everything else is just decoration? Power doesn't sleep, it replicates, it evolves. And by the winter of 1863, Creek realized the Chamberlains were preparing to expand. Letters arrived weekly from Charleston, New Orleans, even as far as London, sealed in red wax, marked with that same spiral-through blade insignia. But now, there were blueprints inside, diagrams, not for barns or cotton gins, but for facilities, underground, ventilated, sterile, facilities meant not for labor, but for transformation. Samuel had started wearing gloves, always. Daniel spoke in numbers and ratios, and Ezekiel. He spent his nights in the East Wing, poring over foreign manuscripts, some written on animal skin, whispering to himself in a tongue Creek could not place. The manor grew quiet, efficient, too quiet. Even the birds avoided the trees behind the cemetery now. One night, Creek saw Margaret burying something alone. Small, wrapped in cloth, a child maybe, or a failed experiment. It was then he understood. The Chamberlains weren't merely feeding an ancient ritual, they were perfecting it, scaling it, preparing it for the next generation. The South was just the beginning. This wasn't about a family, it was about a formula, and formulas are meant to be exported. Creek vanished in March of 1864. No body, no funeral, no ledger entry, just gone. But something strange happened the following year. A Union officer named Captain Raleigh arrived at Rosewood after the war's end, investigating rumors of Confederate medical experimentation. The manor stood empty. The fields were overgrown. The Chamberlain name scrubbed. No records, no descendants, no trace of Daniel, Samuel, or Ezekiel. But Raleigh did find one thing. Buried beneath a floorboard in the east wing, a small iron lockbox. Inside were 7 sealed vials, each labeled in identical handwriting. Blood samples, different blood types, different origins, and beneath them, a knotty E written in careful script. If you found this, it's because they've already moved on. Don't stop them, don't chase them, just remember, because one day, they'll need to begin again. The samples were sent to Washington and then disappeared from record. No follow-up, no investigation, just silence, like a door closing gently behind you. But whispers persist. In Tennessee, in Kentucky, in the boardrooms of pharmaceutical giants and elite universities. And sometimes, if you dig deep enough into the genealogy of America's oldest families, you find that spiral again, woven into crests, branded into bones, still feeding. Some say the Chamberlains died with the South, that their empire rotted with the cotton fields and their secrets were buried with the bones. But that's a lie history tells to keep your hands clean. Power like that doesn't die, it just learns to wear a new face. By 1902, a steel company in Pennsylvania mysteriously acquired 2,000 acres of southern farmland, including the old Rosewood property. No official transaction, no auction, just a silent handover. Within months, industrial researchers began construction on what they called a thermal recovery lab. But locals, what few remained, reported strange noises from beneath the ground, machinery that ran without workers, whispers that traveled without wind. And the children born near that soil, many didn't live past 10. The ones who did weren't right. Too quiet, too strong, too aware. There were sightings, men in long coats collecting soil, women in black veils handing out medical surveys, always asking about bloodlines, always asking if your family had ever worked for the Chamberlains, then leaving without another word. The truth? The dynasty never vanished. It simply became untouchable, incorporated, global, hidden in plain sight. And that spiral, it's no longer carved in wood. It's printed on contraction, it's on pills, on policies. We just stopped noticing. If you've made it this far, you already know. This story isn't history. It's design. A pattern repeated so often it begins to feel like background noise until you step back and see it. The Chamberlain name may have faded from census rolls, but the machine they built, it's still humming. It hums in the profit margins of companies that never die, in research labs buried under federal grants, in blood drives that lose samples, in trials that disappear from public record. That spiral through blade symbol, it's not a relic, it's a watermark, a signature for those who know how power really moves, across time, across blood. And what Creek tried to preserve, his memory, his warnings, they've become seeds. Seeds that bloom in dark corners of the internet, in hushed testimonies, in birthmarks you weren't supposed to inherit. You are not just watching a story, you are inside it. And if you've ever felt like something in this world doesn't add up, like some force is pulling strings beneath governments, wealth, medicine, maybe you're not paranoid, maybe you're remembering. Because power like this never asks permission, it only demands silence. And if 73 unmarked graves can disappear, so can you, unless you choose to speak, unless you choose to see.